You want me to what? I stared at the email on my screen, the cursor blinking as if mocking me. 15 years. 15 years since I'd last walked through their front door, belongings stuffed into trash bags, the echo of my father's voice still ringing in my ears. You made your choice, Morgan. Don't come crawling back. Now, here they were, demanding $4,000 a month for a luxury nursing facility. The same parents who couldn't be bothered to help me finish high school were suddenly expecting me to empty my savings account for their comfort. I took a screenshot and sent it to my best friend Zoe with just 3 words. The audacity, honestly. My phone rang almost immediately. Tell me you're joking, Zoe's voice crackled through the speaker. After everything they put you through? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Apparently, blood is thicker than water only when they need something from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never expected my 16th birthday to be the day my life imploded. Most girls dream of sweet 16 parties, maybe even a car if their parents are generous. I got neither. Instead, I got a pregnancy test and an ultimatum. The day had started normally enough. I woke up in my childhood bedroom in Cedar Ridge, the walls still covered with the same sky blue paint my mother had chosen when I was 10. Posters of bands my parents disapproved of were carefully arranged to cover water stains from the leaky roof my father always promised to fix next summer. The Reynolds family home was all about appearances, a colonial-style house in the good part of town that was slowly crumbling from the inside out, much like our family itself. My older brother Ethan had already left for college on a full scholarship, the golden child, the one who made my parents proud. I was just Morgan. Average grades, a part-time job at the local diner that my father called a waste of time, and a boyfriend named Chris who came from the wrong side of town. My parents had their life mapped out for me. Community college, then marriage to someone from one of the good families in Cedar Ridge. My dreams of art school in Riverside might as well have been dreams of flying to the moon. I had been feeling sick for weeks. At first, I thought it was stress from finals, or maybe the flu. But when I missed my period, a cold dread settled in my stomach. I spent my birthday money on a pregnancy test from the drugstore 2 towns over, where nobody would recognize me. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Undeniable. Unfixable. I sat on the bathroom floor for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Chris. And I had been careful, most of the time. But careful wasn't enough. I was 16, pregnant, and terrified. I should have gone to Aunt Olivia first. She had always been the one person in my family who saw me, really saw me. But in my panic, I made the fatal mistake of turning to my mother. I thought somehow that maternal instinct would kick in, that she would hold me, tell me we would figure it out together. "Mom," I whispered, finding her in the kitchen preparing dinner. "I need to talk to you." She didn't look up from the carrots she was slicing with mechanical precision. If it's about extending your curfew again, the answer is still no. It's not that. It's... The words caught in my throat. I'm pregnant. The knife stilled. The only sound in the kitchen was the tick-tick-tick of the vintage clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my grandmother, passed down through generations of Reynolds women. For one hopeful moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would surprise me. Then she set down the knife and looked at me, her eyes not sad or angry, but empty. "Your father will be home in 20 minutes. You can tell him yourself." Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat at the dining room table, staring at the polished wood surface where we'd shared thousands of family meals, none of which had prepared me for this moment. My mother continued preparing dinner as if I hadn't just shattered her carefully constructed image of our perfect family. When my father's car pulled into the driveway, I felt physically ill. Richard Reynolds was not a man who tolerated disappointment, and I was about to become his biggest one. He didn't shout when I told him. Somehow that was worse. He just looked at me with the same expression he'd worn when Ethan had shown him my brother's straight-A report card, like he was calculating value, measuring worth, and finding me lacking. "Well," he said finally, his voice eerily calm, "you have two options. Get rid of it and we'll never speak of this again, or you're no longer welcome in this house." My mother didn't even look up from her plate. "Richard, maybe we should—" "No," he cut her off. "I won't have her throwing away her life, and I won't have her embarrassing this family." "It's my body," I said, my voice small but steady. "I don't know what I want to do yet, but it should be my choice." His laugh was cold. "Your choice? You're 16. You live under my roof. You've already made your choice by being irresponsible." "I need time to think," I pleaded. "You have until tomorrow," he said, returning to his meal as if we were discussing something as trivial as my curfew. "Make the right decision, Morgan." I looked to my mother, hoping for some sign of support, but she kept her eyes down, pushing food around her plate. In that moment, I realized I was completely alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. That night, I called Chris, then Zoe, then finally Aunt Olivia. Chris panicked, making vague promises he couldn't keep. Zoe offered her couch, but her parents were hardly more understanding than mine. It was Aunt Olivia who said the words I needed to hear. "Come to me, Morgan. Whatever you decide, I'll help you." By morning, I had made my decision. Not because it was the right one, or the easy one, but because it was the only one that let me keep some shred of dignity. "I'm keeping my baby," I told my parents at breakfast, my hands shaking but my voice firm. My father didn't even look surprised. He'd expected this, maybe even hoped for it. An easy way to wash his hands of his disappointing daughter. "Then you know our conditions," he said, folding his newspaper neatly. "Richard, she's 16, my mother whispered, a flicker of maternal concern finally breaking through her carefully constructed facade. "She's old enough to get pregnant. She's old enough to deal with the consequences," he replied coldly. 3 hours later, I was standing on the porch with 2 trash bags containing everything I could carry. My father had even taken the suitcase I'd tried to use. It was his property after all. As I waited for Aunt Olivia to pick me up, I watched. My mother through the window, cleaning the kitchen with the same vacant expression she'd worn at dinner. She never came outside to say goodbye. She never tried to stop him. And in that moment, her silence hurt more than my father's cruelty. Aunt Eke. Olivia's basement apartment became my home for the next 6 months. It was small, dark, and damp, but it was safe. She helped me enroll in a GED program, took me to doctor's appointments, and held my hand when I cried myself to sleep, which was most nights. Chris stuck around for about a month before the reality of impending fatherhood sent him running. I couldn't even blame him. We were both children, suddenly facing a very adult situation. At 7 months pregnant, I miscarried. The pain was indescribable, not just the physical agony, but the crushing emotional weight. I had lost the baby I'd sacrificed everything for, the baby whose existence had cost me my family, my education, my future. I called my mother from the Bai hospital. I don't know what I expected, comfort maybe, or just acknowledgement of my loss. "It's probably for the best," she said after a long silence. "Now you can come home and we can put this whole unfortunate situation behind us." I hung up without answering. There was no home to go back to, not anymore. The last thread connecting me to the Reynolds family had been severed. That was the day I truly became an adult. Not when I saw those 2 pink lines, not when I walked out of my parents' house with trash bags of belongings, but in that sterile hospital room, when I realized that I was completely on my own, and that I would have to build my life from scratch. Aunt Olivia suggested I take some time to heal, but I couldn't afford that luxury. I needed to work, to save, to create a future for myself that wasn't defined by my parents' rejection or my body's betrayal. I took on extra shifts at the diner, studied for my GED in the early morning hours, and applied for every scholarship I could find. When Riverside Art Institute offered me a partial scholarship, I cried for the first time since losing the baby, this time with relief. The day I left for Riverside, Aunt Olivia drove me to the bus station. I had one suitcase, now a graduation gift from her, and a backpack containing everything I valued. "You call me if you need anything," she said, hugging me tightly. "Anything at all." "I will," I promised, though we both knew I wouldn't. I needed to stand on my own. As the bus pulled away from Cedar Ridge, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore except painful memories and people who had proven they didn't deserve my love. I was 18 years old, alone in a new city, with $342 in my bank account and a determination that burned like fire in my chest. I would build a life they couldn't touch, a success they couldn't claim credit for, a happiness they would never know. What I didn't realize then was that you can't outrun your past forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sooner or later, it catches up to you, demanding to be acknowledged. For me, that reckoning came 15 years later, in the form of an email asking for money for a nursing home. But on that bus to Riverside, with the weight of Cedar Ridge lifting from my shoulders with every mile, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside me. Hope. A hope that would sustain me through the hardest years of my life, through dingy apartments and multiple jobs and nights when dinner was a packet of ramen, split over 2 days. A hope that would eventually lead me to become the woman I am today. The woman my parents never thought I could be. The woman who now holds the power they once wielded so carelessly. Life in Riverside wasn't the freedom I'd imagined during those dark months in Aunt Olivia's basement. Freedom, I quickly learned, comes with its own set of constraints. Rent due on the first of the month, groceries that cost more than I'd budgeted, art supplies that were luxury items I could rarely afford. My first apartment was in the Pines, a complex that had probably been nice sometime in the previous century. The carpet smelled of cigarettes and something worse. The walls were thin enough that I knew my neighbors' arguments by heart, and the bathroom ceiling leaked whenever my upstairs neighbor showered. But it was mine, paid for with my own money from working at a coffee shop during the day and waiting tables at night. Art school was both heaven and hell. Heaven because for the first time I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who saw the world through the same kaleidoscope lens that I did. Hell because while other students went home for holidays or called their parents for extra money when supplies ran short, I was alone, stretching canvases on frames I'd dumpster dived, behind the art store, mixing paints to make them last longer. Professor Winters, my drawing instructor, noticed. She saw me washing and reusing paper, carefully preserving every scrap of charcoal. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "You have real talent, Morgan," she said, examining a still life I'd completed. "But you're holding back. There's a tentativeness to your work, like you're afraid to fully commit to the page." I shrugged, uncomfortable with both the criticism and the praise. Art supplies are expensive. She studied me over her wire-rimmed glasses. The department has a scholarship fund for promising students who need materials. I'd like to recommend you. Pride made me want to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you. That would help a lot." "Good." She nodded, satisfied. "Now, about your living situation." "What about it?" I tensed. "There's an opening for a resident assistant in the campus apartments. Free housing in exchange. For 20 hours of work per week. You'd have to move mid-semester, but I'll take it," I said immediately. The money I'd save on rent would change everything. Professor Winters smiled. I thought you might say that. That conversation changed the trajectory of my college experience. With secure housing and access to proper materials, my work flourished. I still worked at the coffee shop, but I was able to quit the late-night serving job, giving me more time to create. It was during my junior year that I received the first message from my brother. A Facebook friend request, followed by a simple message. It's been too long. Can we talk? Ethan had been away at college when my parents kicked me out. According to Aunt Olivia, he'd tried to intervene on my behalf, but our father had shut him down. Still, he hadn't reached out in 3 years. Not when I was pregnant and alone, not when I lost the baby, not when I started college. I stared at the message for days before finally replying, "Why now?" His response came quickly. Because I was a coward then, and I've regretted it every day since. I should have stood up for you. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway, between Riverside and the tech hub where he worked as a software engineer. The moment I saw him, the years fell away. He was still Ethan, taller, more filled out with the beginnings of our father's receding hairline, but still the brother who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. We hugged awkwardly, then sat across from each other, two strangers with shared DNA and shared trauma. You look good, he said, studying me. Healthy. Art school agrees with me, I replied, fidgeting with my coffee cup. How's the coding world? Profitable, he answered with a half smile. Soul-crushing sometimes, but profitable. The small talk couldn't last forever. Eventually, we fell silent, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between us. They don't know I'm meeting you, he finally said. They wouldn't understand. Still the same then. He nodded, looking down. Worse in some ways. Dad's company downsized. He didn't lose his job, but he took a significant pay cut. Mom started drinking more. The perfect Reynolds family image is cracking. I should have felt satisfaction at this news. Instead, I felt a hollow ache. And you? Are you still the golden child? Ethan winced. I never wanted that role, Morgan. You know that. Do I? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. You weren't there. You didn't have to pack your life into garbage bags. You got to keep your family. A family that pretends you don't exist isn't much of a family, he said quietly. Every holiday, every birthday, there's this. Hole where you should be. Mom keeps a photo of you in her bedside drawer. I found it when I was looking for aspirin. Last Christmas. This revelation shook me more than I wanted to admit. She could have called. Any of you could have. Pride, Ethan sighed. Dad's pride, Mom's fear, my cowardice. We're not good people, Morgan. No, I agreed. You're not. We talked for hours, clearing the air as much as possible. Ethan filled me in on family news, our grandmother's death. No one had thought to notify me. Our cousin's wedding, I wasn't invited. Our father's health problems, beginning of heart disease, refusing to change his diet. Before we parted, he handed me an envelope. I can't change what happened, but I can help now. Inside was a check for $5,000. My first instinct was to tear it up, to throw his guilt money back in his face. But I thought of the student loans accumulating, the better apartment I could afford, the art supplies I still rationed. This doesn't fix anything, I said, tucking the envelope into my bag. I know, he replied, his eyes sad. But it's a start. We hugged goodbye, and this time it felt less awkward, more like family. The kind of family we could have been if circumstances were different. We promised to stay in touch, and surprisingly, we did. Monthly emails became weekly phone calls. Ethan became the one connection to my past that I didn't resent. It was Ethan who called me the day I graduated, since our parents refused his suggestion that they attend. It was Ethan who helped me move into my first real apartment after college. And it was Ethan who warned me, years later, that our parents were facing financial trouble and might reach out. "They're getting older," he said during one of our calls. "Dad's heart condition is worse, and their insurance doesn't cover the kind of care they want." "That sounds like a them problem," I replied, balancing my phone between my ear and shoulder as I worked on a commission for a corporate client. A far cry from the artistic vision I'd had in college, but it paid well, and I'd learned that sometimes compromises were necessary. "Morgan," Ethan's voice held a note of pleading. "I know they hurt you. Believe me, I know. But they're still our parents." "Biology doesn't make a family," I said, the mantra I'd repeated to myself on countless lonely nights. "Actions do." He sighed. "Just don't be surprised if they contact you. They're getting desperate." "They know where to find me if they want to apologize," I said, ending the conversation. What I didn't tell Ethan was that our father had already tried to reach out in his own way. A year earlier, I'd received a Christmas card, the first acknowledgement in over a decade that I existed. Inside was a generic holiday greeting and a family photo. My parents, Ethan, his wife Laura, and their newborn son. No personal message, no apology, just a mass-produced card like they might send to a distant acquaintance. I shredded it immediately. So when the email arrived demanding, that I contribute to their nursing home fund, I wasn't entirely surprised. What shocked me was the entitled tone, the assumption that, of course, I would help, that my financial success, exaggerated in Ethan's reports apparently, obligated me to care for the people who had thrown me away like garbage. The email didn't contain a single word of remorse, not even a token acknowledgement of past wrongs. Just a detailed breakdown of costs, an account number for wire transfers, and a note that as family, I should be eager to ensure my parents' comfort in their final years. I forwarded it to Ethan with a single question. "Did you know about this?" His response was immediate. "No. God, Morgan, I'm so sorry. I'll talk to them." But the damage was done. After 15 years of silence, the first direct communication from my parents was a request for money. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted their choices, but because their retirement fund wasn't sufficient for the lifestyle they felt entitled to. The painful truth I'd been avoiding for years crystallized in that moment. They had never loved me. Not as a daughter deserving of unconditional love, but as a resource, a reflection of themselves, a means to an end. When I ceased to be useful in fulfilling their image of the perfect family, they discarded me. Now that I could potentially be useful again, this time financially, they reached out with hands outstretched. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I booked a flight to Cedar Ridge. It was time to face my past head-on, to look into the eyes of the people who had shaped me through their absence and tell them exactly who I had become without them. Zoe thought I was crazy. "Why give them the satisfaction?" she asked when I told her my plans. "They don't deserve your time, let alone your money." "This isn't for them," I explained, packing a small overnight bag. "It's for me. I need to say the things I never got to say. I need them to see me, really see me, and know what they threw away." The flight to Cedar Ridge was turbulent, a fitting metaphor for the emotional journey I was undertaking. As the plane descended, I could see the familiar landscape of my childhood, the river that snaked through town, the cluster of buildings that made up the small downtown, the rolling hills beyond. I rented a car at the airport, a sleek black sedan that cost more per day than my first week's salary at the coffee shop. A small, petty part of me wanted them to see it when I pulled into their driveway, tangible proof of my success despite their abandonment. The family home looked smaller than I remembered, the once pristine lawn now patchy and overgrown. The white paint was peeling in places, and the porch steps sagged slightly. The physical manifestation of my parents' declining circumstances was oddly unsatisfying. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage. Through the front window, I could see movement. My mother, moving slowly with the aid of a walker. My father, thinner than I remembered, in a recliner by the window. They looked old. Of course they were old. My father was nearing 70, my mother a few years younger. But in my mind, they had remained frozen in time. The powerful figures who had shaped my early life through their rejection. Seeing them diminished by age. And illness didn't bring the vindication I'd expected. Before I could change my mind, I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. My hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment before I pressed it, hearing the same chime that had announced visitors throughout my childhood. My mother opened the door, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized me. "Morgan?" she whispered, her hand clutching the walker for support. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "May I come in?" She stepped back wordlessly, allowing me to enter the house where I'd spent the first 16 years of my life. The interior had changed little, the same formal furniture, the same family photos on the wall, none featuring me. The same oppressive stillness that had always made me feel like I needed to be smaller, quieter, less myself. My father looked up from his newspaper, his expression changing from irritation at being disturbed to shock to something unreadable. "Morgan," he said, making no move to rise from his chair. "Dad?" I replied, standing in the center of the living room, refusing to take a seat until invited. Some old habits die hard. "What are you doing here?" he asked, folding his newspaper with deliberate movements. "I received your email," I said simply. "I thought we should talk in person." My mother lowered herself carefully onto the couch. "Would you like some tea? I can—" "No, thank you," I interrupted. "I won't be staying long." The three of us regarded each other in uncomfortable silence. I took the opportunity to really look at them, the parents who had shaped me through both their presence and their absence. My mother's once perfect hair was thin and gray, her hands gnarled with arthritis. My father's commanding presence had diminished with his health, but his eyes still held the critical judgment I remembered. "You look well," my mother finally said. "Ethan mentioned you're doing art. Professionally?" "I'm a graphic designer for Horizon Technologies," I replied. "I also do fine art commissions on the side." My father made a small sound, not quite approval, but acknowledgement. "Good money in that, I hear." And there it was, the seamless transition to what they really wanted from me. No questions about my life, my happiness, my journey. Just a probe into my financial situation. "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "Very good money." "Well, then you understand our situation," he continued, gesturing to the email I hadn't responded to. "Your mother needs specialized care. The nursing facility we've chosen is expensive, but it's the best." "And you want me to help pay for it?" I stated flatly. "You're our daughter," my mother said, as if that explained everything. As if the last 15 years hadn't happened. As if they hadn't thrown me out with nothing but trash bags of clothing. The audacity took my breath away. I had prepared for many reactions, anger, guilt trips, even tearful reconciliation, but not this casual expectation, this bizarre rewriting of history. "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Your daughter? Because the last time we spoke, you made it very clear that I wasn't part of this family anymore." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You were a child making a foolish decision. We did what we thought was best." Best for whom? I felt the carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. Not for me. Certainly not for my unborn child. "That was a long time ago," my mother interjected. "Surely we can move past it now." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made her flinch. "Move past it? You kicked out your pregnant 16-year-old daughter. You never called, never wrote, never checked if I was alive or dead. For 15 years, I didn't exist to you. And now you want me to empty my bank account for your comfort. We're family, my father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. Family takes care of each other. That's funny, I replied, because I don't remember you taking care of me when I needed it most. The painful truth hung in the air between us, undeniable and raw. They hadn't changed. They hadn't reflected or grown or recognized their cruelty. They simply needed something from me now. And so they were willing to acknowledge my existence, again. In that moment, standing in the living room where I'd once been told I was no longer welcome, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of their rejection, wondering what I could have done differently, if there was something fundamentally unlovable about me. But looking at them now, these small, aging people with their entitlement and lack of remorse, I finally understood. The deficiency had never been in me. It had always been in them, in their conditional love, in their inability to see me as anything but an extension of their own desires and image. I won't be contributing to your nursing home fund, I said calmly. Not a single penny. My father's face flushed with anger. After everything we did for you. What exactly did you do for me? I cut him off. Throw me out when I needed you most? Pretend I didn't exist for 15 years? Send a Christmas card without so much as a personal note? We gave you a home, an education, he started. Until I became inconvenient, I finished for him. That's not love, Dad. That's ownership. My mother began to cry, quiet tears tracking down her lined face. Once, those tears would have devastated me, made me backtrack and apologize. Now, I recognize them for what they were, manipulation, not remorse. Morgan, she pleaded, we're your parents. Biology doesn't make a family, I said, echoing the words I'd said to Ethan. Actions do. And your actions showed me exactly how much I meant to you. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. I built a life without you. A good life, with people who love me unconditionally. People who would never throw me away when I made a mistake or needed help. That's what family is. And you're just people I used to know. As I walked back to my rental car, I heard my father calling after me, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge the damage they'd done. Instead, he shouted, "You'll regret this, Morgan. When we're gone, you'll wish you'd made amends." I turned back one last time, looking at the man who had once been the center of my universe, whose approval I had desperately sought. I've lived without you for 15 years, I said quietly. I think I'll manage. As I drove away from Cedar Ridge, from the house that had never really been a home, I felt neither triumph nor sadness, just a profound sense of closure. The painful truth had finally been spoken aloud. They had never loved me the way parents should love a child. And more importantly, I had finally accepted that their failure to love me was never a reflection of my worth. The painful truth wasn't that my parents didn't love me enough to keep me. It was that I had spent years believing that meant I wasn't worthy of love at all. But I was. I am. And that realization, more than any confrontation, was the true healing I had needed all along. The drive back to Riverside was longer than I remembered, each mile giving me time to process what had happened in my childhood home. I hadn't expected closure, and I wasn't sure I'd found it, but something had shifted inside me. The weight I'd carried for 15 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like strength. I called Zoe from a rest stop halfway home, needing to hear a friendly voice. "How did it go?" she asked, concern evident even through the spotty connection. About as well as you'd expect, I replied, watching cars zoom past on the highway. They wanted my money, not a relationship. They didn't even apologize. Zoe's sigh crackled through the speaker. Are you okay? It was a simple question, but I had to think about it. Was I okay? I had just confronted the two people who had shaped my life through their rejection, and I had walked away without giving them what they wanted. There should have been satisfaction. In that, maybe even triumph. But all I felt was a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. I think I am, I answered honestly. For the first time, I saw them for who they really are. Not the giants of my childhood memories, but just, flawed, selfish people. People who never deserved the power I gave them over my life. That's my girl, Zoe said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. So, what now? What now, indeed? I had spent so much energy preparing for the confrontation that I hadn't thought much about what would come after. The future stretched before me, suddenly free from the shadow of my past. Now I live my life on my terms, I said, realizing the truth of it as the words left my mouth. No more looking back. When I returned to my apartment in Riverside, my partner Jamie was waiting, concern etched across their face. We'd been together for 3 years, sharing a comfortable life that I had sometimes held at arm's length, afraid to fully commit to happiness I wasn't sure I deserved. How was it? Jamie asked, pulling me into a hug that smelled like home. I buried my face in their shoulder, allowing myself to be held. It was necessary. That night, as Jamie slept beside me, I lay awake thinking about the choices that had brought me to this moment. My parents had made their choice 15 years ago, and today, I had made mine. But there were more choices ahead, important ones, that would define the next chapter of my life. The first email arrived 3 days later. My father, his tone oscillating between anger and bargaining. Morgan, I don't think you understand the severity of our situation. Your mother requires specialized care that Medicare won't cover. We've worked hard all our lives and we deserve dignity in our final years. As our daughter, you have a responsibility to contribute. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for what we're owed after raising you for 16 years. I deleted it without responding, but my hands shook as I did so. The audacity was breathtaking, as if the 16 years before they threw me out somehow outweighed the 15 years of complete abandonment. As if they had done me a favor by providing the basic necessities of life until it became inconvenient. The second email came from my mother a week later, her approach more emotional. Darling, I know things weren't perfect, but we did the best we could with the values we were raised with. Your situation caught us by surprise, and we reacted poorly. Can't we put the past behind us and come together as a family should? Your father would never admit it, but he misses you. Please reconsider helping us in our time of need. This one was harder to delete. Not because I believed her sudden profession of remorse, but because a small, broken part of me, the 16-year-old girl who had cried herself to sleep in Aunt Olivia's basement, still craved a mother's love, even from a woman who had proven incapable of providing it. I drafted multiple responses but sent none of them. What was the point? She wasn't apologizing. She was manipulating. The "we did the best we could" line was particularly galling. Their best had been to throw their pregnant teenage daughter into the street with garbage bags of belongings. Ethan called next, his voice strained. They're telling everyone you refused to help them because you're still holding a grudge. Is that a grudge? I asked, staring out my apartment window at the Riverside skyline. Or is it the natural consequence of their actions? He sighed. Look, I know they were wrong. Believe me, I know. But they're getting desperate. Dad's pension isn't enough. Their savings are almost gone, and the medical bills keep piling up. That sounds like a problem they created, I said, my voice steady despite the guilt tugging at me. They had 15 years to plan for retirement, 15 years to build a relationship with me if they wanted my help. They're still our parents, Morgan. No, I corrected him gently. They're your parents. They gave up the right to be mine. A long time ago. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the business card Jamie had given me months ago. A therapist they thought might help me work through my family issues, as they delicately put it. Dr. Elena Montero, family therapist. I had tucked the card away, not ready to dive into those murky waters. But now, with my parents' demands echoing in my head, I wondered if it was time. I made the appointment the next morning. Dr. Montero's office was in a converted Victorian house near downtown Riverside, warm and inviting in a way that immediately put me at ease. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. "So," she said, once I'd settled into the comfortable chair across from her, "what brings you here today?" I didn't know where to start, so I began at the beginning. The positive pregnancy test, my father's ultimatum, the trash bags of belongings, Aunt Olivia's basement, the miscarriage, the years of struggle, and finally, the email demanding money for a nursing home. Dr. Montero listened without interruption, only occasionally nodding or making a note. When I finished, she set down her notepad and looked at me thoughtfully. "That's quite a journey, Morgan. What do you feel when you think about your parents now?" I considered the question carefully. Not hatred, not anymore. Just nothing. They're strangers who happen to share my DNA. And yet their request for financial help has disturbed you enough to seek therapy. Why do you think that is? The question hit me like a splash of cold water. Why had their email affected me so deeply if I truly felt nothing? I guess I'm afraid I'm making the wrong choice, I admitted. Not for them, but for me. I don't want to be the kind of person who abandons family when they're in need. I don't want to be like them. Dr. Montero nodded. That's a very insightful observation. Many adult children of neglectful parents struggle with this exact dilemma. The fear that by protecting themselves, they're somehow becoming the very people who hurt them. "So what do I do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "That's a decision only you can make," she replied. "But I'd like to reframe the question. Instead of asking what you owe your biological parents, ask yourself what you owe the 16-year-old girl who had to grow up too fast. What would she need you to do?" The question lingered with me long after the session ended. What did I owe my younger self? Protection? Validation? The right to prioritize her hard-won peace over the demands of people who had caused her so much pain? When I got home that evening, Jamie was cooking dinner, the scent of garlic and tomatoes filling our apartment. They looked up when I walked in, their smile fading as they read my expression. "Tough session?" I nodded, dropping my bag on the counter and wrapping my arms around their waist from behind, drawing comfort from their solid presence. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I murmured into their shoulder. "Just, thank you for being here. For being constant." Jamie turned in my arms, their expression serious. "Always, Morgan. That's what love is, showing up, day after day, not just when it's convenient." The simplicity of the statement struck me. Love wasn't a fixed quantity, to be rationed or withdrawn when someone disappointed you. It wasn't conditional on perfect behavior or conformity to expectations. It was a choice made daily, a commitment to stand by someone through their mistakes and growth. My parents had never understood that. Their love had always come with conditions, with the unspoken threat of withdrawal if I stepped out of line. And when I had, they had followed through on that threat without hesitation. That night, I made a decision. Not out of anger or revenge, but out of the clearest understanding I'd ever had about what love should be and what it shouldn't. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, navigating to my online banking portal. With steady hands, I set up a new account and transferred a sum into it. Not the $4,000 a month my parents wanted, but a smaller amount that I could afford without compromising my own financial security. Then I wrote an email. Dad and Mom, I've thought carefully about your request for financial assistance. I will not be contributing to the luxury nursing facility you've chosen. That decision reflects the reality of our relationship, or lack thereof, over the past 15 years. However, I am establishing a separate fund that will provide $500 monthly toward basic medical expenses not covered by Medicare or your insurance. This money will be paid directly to providers, not to you. I'm doing this not because I owe you, but because I choose to be better than the example you set for me. This arrangement is non-negotiable. It represents the limit of my financial responsibility toward you. Any attempts to contact me for additional funds will result in the immediate termination of this support. Morgan. I read it over 3 times. Before sending it, each word carefully chosen to establish boundaries while still offering limited help. It wasn't what they wanted, but it was more than they deserved, and that distinction mattered to me. Jamie found me still at my desk an hour later, staring at the sent email. "You okay?" they asked, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I think so," I replied, looking up at them. "I just made the hardest decision of my life." "Harder than walking away from your parents' house at 16? I shook my head. That wasn't really a decision. They gave me an ultimatum, and I refused to compromise my bodily autonomy. This is me actively choosing to help people who hurt me deeply, but on my terms, not theirs. Jamie pulled up a chair beside me, taking my hand. "Why? You don't owe them anything." "I know," I said, squeezing their hand. "I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. Because I need to know that their cruelty didn't change who I am at my core. Someone who believes in compassion, even when it's difficult." The response came the next morning, a terse message from my father. "This is insulting. We need proper care, not charity. If you can't fulfill your obligations as a daughter, don't bother at all." I stared at the message, a strange calm settling over me. They still didn't get it. They still saw me as an extension of themselves, a resource to be tapped, rather than a person with my own agency and boundaries. Without hesitation, I replied, "As you wish. The offer is withdrawn." Then I closed my laptop and went to work. The weight of indecision finally lifted from my shoulders. I had tried to find a middle ground, a way to help without sacrificing my self-respect. They had rejected it, and in doing so, they had freed me from any lingering obligation I might have felt. Dr. Montero nodded in approval when I told her about the exchange during our next session. "That was a courageous decision, Morgan. Both. The initial offer and the willingness to withdraw it when your boundaries weren't respected." "It doesn't feel courageous," I admitted. "It feels selfish somehow." "Setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish," she corrected gently. "It's necessary. You gave them an opportunity to accept help on reasonable terms. They chose to reject it because it didn't meet their unrealistic expectations. That's their choice, not your failure." Over the next few weeks, the emails from my parents became increasingly desperate and angry. My father threatened legal action, though there was no legal basis for his demands. My mother pleaded illness and abandonment. Ethan called, torn between understanding my position and feeling pressured to solve our parents' financial crisis, himself. "I can't afford what they're asking either," he confessed during one late-night call. "Laura and I just bought a house, we have the baby, and her mom just moved in with us because of her Parkinson's. I'm stretched thin." "You don't have to justify yourself to me," I assured him. "Their financial problems aren't your fault or your responsibility. But they're going to lose the house, Morgan. They've already taken out a second mortgage. Dad's medication costs are insane, and Mom needs that hip surgery." The guilt in his voice was palpable and achingly familiar. We had both been raised to believe that our parents' happiness was our responsibility, that we owed them for the basic care they had provided. It had taken me 15 years of separation to recognize how toxic that belief was. "Listen to me, Ethan," I said firmly. "You have a family of your own now, a wife and son who need you. Your first responsibility is to them, not to parents who are reaping the consequences of their own poor planning and choices. But, no buts. If they need help, there are resources available. Medicare, Medicaid, social services, senior assistance programs. I'll email you some links, but you can't set yourself on fire to keep them warm." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights, thinking about the different trajectories our lives had taken. Ethan had stayed in the fold, the dutiful son who never quite broke free from our parents' expectations. I had been cast out, forced to build a life from nothing, and in that hardship, I had found a strength and clarity he still struggled to claim. The next day, I did something I'd been contemplating for months. I proposed to Jamie, not with a grand gesture or expensive ring, but with a simple question asked over morning coffee in our sun-drenched kitchen. "Will you marry me?" Jamie's coffee mug froze halfway to their lips. "What?" "Marry me," I repeated, suddenly nervous but certain. I know I've been hesitant about commitment, that I've kept parts of myself walled off because I was afraid of being hurt again. But I'm ready now. I want to build a family with you, the kind of family that's based on choice and love, not obligation and control. Jamie set down their mug, eyes searching my face. "Where is this coming from?" "From clarity," I answered honestly. Facing my parents forced me to confront the fears I've been carrying. That love is always conditional, that I'm somehow unworthy of commitment. But you've shown me every day that real love isn't like that, and I don't want to waste another minute being afraid of happiness. Their smile spread slowly, lighting up their entire face. In that case, yes. Absolutely, yes. We decided on a small ceremony in the botanical gardens where we'd had our first date. Just close friends, Aunt Olivia, and Ethan's family. My parents wouldn't be invited, a decision that felt right rather than spiteful. As we began planning, I received another email from my father. The tone had changed from demanding to defeated. "Morgan, your mother has been hospitalized. Her hip finally gave out, and they discovered other complications during surgery. Medicare will only cover another 3 days in the facility before transferring her to a state nursing home. I cannot bear to see her in such a place after the life we've provided for her. Please reconsider your position. Whatever you think of me, your mother doesn't deserve this indignity." I sat with the email for a full day before responding, discussing it with both Jamie and Dr. Montero. The easy answer would have been to ignore it, to maintain the boundaries I had established. But something nagged at me, not guilt, exactly, but a question about what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. "What if I pay for 1 month at the facility they've chosen?" I asked Jamie as we walked through the park near our apartment. "Just to give them time to make other arrangements. Or apply for assistance programs." Jamie squeezed my hand. "If that's what you want to do, I support you. But only if it comes from a place of strength, not obligation." "I think it does," I replied, watching a family with young children fly a kite in the open field. "I'm not doing it because I owe them, or because I'm seeking their approval. I'm doing it because I want to be the kind of person who can show compassion without expectation." My email to my father was brief and clear. "I will pay for 1 month at the facility you've chosen. This is a one-time assistance to give you time to make alternative arrangements. After that month, any further financial responsibility returns to you." This is not an opening for negotiation or ongoing support. It is a single act of grace that comes with no strings attached. His response was immediate and surprisingly humble. "Thank you. I don't have the words to express what this means to us. I made the payment directly to the facility, specifying the exact dates the funds would cover. Then I put the entire situation out of my mind and focused on my upcoming wedding, refusing to allow my parents' problems to overshadow this joyful time in my life. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. A clear autumn day, golden light, filtering through the trees, Jamie's smile as we exchanged vows written from the heart rather than tradition. Aunt Olivia cried happy tears, and Ethan stood proudly as my witness, his wife and son watching from the front row. As Jamie and I shared our first dance on the small patio of the garden's reception area, I caught sight of Aunt Olivia watching us, her expression a mixture of pride and something else. Perhaps relief that the broken girl she had taken in had finally found wholeness. Later, as guests mingled and champagne flowed, she pulled me aside, pressing something into my hand. "I've been saving this for the right moment," she said softly. It was a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, clearly antique. "This belonged to your grandmother," Aunt Olivia explained. "She wanted you to have it when you got married. I've kept it all these years, hoping this day would come." I ran my finger over the intricate engraving. "But how? I thought everything of hers went to Mom." Aunt Olivia smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let's just say I liberated it before the will was executed. Your grandmother loved you, Morgan. She was heartbroken by what happened, though she was too ill by then to intervene. The knowledge that someone from my biological family had loved me unconditionally, had wanted me to have this piece of her even after I was erased from the family narrative, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "For everything. For being the family I needed when no one else was." "You deserved better than what you got," she said fiercely. "But look at you now, strong, successful, loved. You built this. Life on your own terms. I couldn't be prouder if you were my own daughter." As the reception wound down, Ethan approached, his expression serious. "Mom's asking about you," he said quietly. "She knows today was your wedding day." I felt Jamie tense beside me, protective as always. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he replied simply. "That you're happy, that the ceremony was beautiful, and that she missed out on something precious because of choices made long ago." I nodded, appreciating his honesty. And she cried," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Really cried. Not the manipulative tears she uses to get her way. I think she finally understands what was lost." I absorbed this information, waiting for the wave of guilt or vindication to hit me. But all I felt was a quiet acknowledgement that some losses can't be undone, some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned to ash. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "But today isn't about the past. It's about the future, Jamie. And I are building together." Ethan smiled, raising his glass in a small toast. "To your future, then. May it be everything you deserve." That night, as Jamie and I lay in our hotel room, wedding bands gleaming new on our fingers, I thought about the courageous decision I had made not just today, but every day since I was 16, the decision to believe I deserved more than what my parents had offered, to create a life defined by love rather than fear, to build family based on choice rather than blood. "What are you thinking about?" Jamie murmured, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "About choices," I replied, turning to face them. "And how the hardest ones are usually the most important." They nodded, understanding as always. "Like choosing to help your mother despite everything?" "Yes. And like choosing to walk away from my parents' house at 16, choosing to pursue art instead of a practical career, choosing to be vulnerable with you when every instinct told me to protect myself." Jamie pulled me closer. "Those choices made you who you are, and I love who you are. every complicated, courageous bit. As I drifted to sleep in the arms of the person I had chosen to build my life with, I realized that the most courageous decision wasn't any single act of defiance or forgiveness. It was the daily choice to live authentically, to trust my own judgment, to value my peace above others' expectations. The 16-year-old girl with trash bags of belongings could never have imagined this moment, this safety, this love, this certainty. But every choice she made, every hardship she endured, had led here. And I was profoundly grateful to her for her courage, for her refusal to be defined by rejection, for her determination to create a life worth living. That was the courageous decision that had saved me. Not saying no to my parents' demands for money, but saying yes to my own worth, again and again, even when no one else could see it. Our honeymoon was a week in a small coastal town where Jamie and I rented a cottage overlooking the ocean. The first few days were blissful. Long walks on the beach, meals at local seafood restaurants, falling asleep to the sound of waves crashing against the shore. For those days, I managed to forget everything except the present moment and the person sharing it with me. But on the fourth morning, reality intruded. I was sipping coffee on the porch swing when my phone rang. Ethan's name flashing on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect this rare pocket of peace I'd carved out. But something in me, perhaps the new sense of security I'd found, made me answer. "Morgan," Ethan's voice sounded strained, exhausted. "I'm sorry to bother you on your honeymoon." "What's wrong?" I asked, already knowing it had to be serious for him to call now. "Mom's being discharged from the facility tomorrow. The month you paid for is up, and Dad doesn't have a plan. He's been frantically calling everyone we know trying to borrow money, but no one's willing to help." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of family obligation trying to settle back onto my shoulders. "Ethan, I was very clear about this being a one-time assistance." "I know," he sighed. "Believe me, I know. I'm not calling to ask you for more money. I don't know what to do. Dad's talking about selling the house, but the market's terrible right now, and they're underwater on the mortgage anyway." I watched a seagull dive into the waves, emerging with something clutched in its beak. "What do they expect to happen?" "That's just it. They don't have expectations anymore, just panic. The state nursing home they've been assigned to It's pretty bad, Morgan. I visited yesterday. The smell alone." He trailed off, and I could hear the conflict in his voice. The son who wanted to help his parents versus the rational adult who knew their problems weren't his to solve. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this," I said sincerely. "But you know they've had plenty of time to plan. They chose to ignore reality until it crashed down on them." "I know," he repeated, his voice hollow. "I guess I just needed someone to talk to who understands what they're like. Laura tries, but she didn't grow up with them." We talked for a few more minutes, Ethan venting his frustration and me offering what comfort I could without taking on responsibility that wasn't mine. When we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the waves, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Jamie found me there, settling beside me on the swing. "Family stuff?" I nodded, leaning into their warmth. "My parents' financial house of cards is collapsing. And Ethan wants you to fix it?" "No, surprisingly. He just needed to talk to someone who gets it." I turned to look at Jamie, studying the face I'd wake up to for the rest of my life. "I'm sorry this is intruding on our honeymoon." They shook their head, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Don't apologize. This is what marriage is, sharing each other's burdens, even the complicated family ones." For the rest of our honeymoon, I tried to push thoughts of my parents aside, focusing instead on building memories with Jamie. But the knowledge that a storm was brewing back home cast a faint shadow over even our brightest moments. When we returned to Riverside, real life resumed with startling speed. Jamie went back to their job at the architectural firm. I returned to my design projects at Horizon Technologies, and we settled into married life with surprising ease. For a few weeks, I heard nothing more from Ethan or my parents, and I began to hope that perhaps they had found a solution without me. Then the letter arrived, formal, typed on legal letterhead, addressed to Mrs. Morgan Wilson Reynolds. I opened it at the kitchen counter, scanning the contents with increasing disbelief. "What is it?" Jamie asked, noticing my expression. "A letter from my parents' lawyer," I replied, my voice oddly calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "They're claiming I have a filial responsibility to support them financially based on some obscure state law. They're demanding I pay $2,000 monthly toward their care, effective immediately." Jamie took the letter, reading it with narrowed eyes. "This is absurd. You need to talk to a lawyer." "Already ahead of you," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing a number I'd saved months ago, anticipating something like this might happen. Attorney Sandra Chen had come highly recommended by a colleague at Horizon who had gone through a complex, family legal battle. Her office was sleek and modern, walls adorned with abstract art that immediately put me at ease, perhaps because it signaled she might understand a creative soul like mine. "Legally, they don't have much of a case," she explained after reviewing the letter. "Filial responsibility laws exist in some states, but they're rarely enforced, and there are numerous exceptions. In your case, the fact that they kicked you out as a minor and provided no support during your formative years would almost certainly qualify as an exception." Relief flooded through me. "So I can just ignore this?" Attorney Chen's expression turned serious. "You could, but I wouldn't recommend it. Ignoring legal threats, even baseless ones, can sometimes complicate matters. I suggest we respond formally, outlining why these laws don't apply in your circumstance and making it clear you'll defend yourself vigorously if they pursue this route." I nodded, grateful for her straightforward advice. "And if they do pursue it? Then we'll deal with it," she said confidently. "But based on what you've told me about their financial situation, they likely can't afford prolonged legal action. This is probably a scare tactic, hoping you'll pay to avoid conflict." The letter Attorney Chen drafted was polite but uncompromising, dismantling my parents' legal argument piece by piece while documenting the circumstances of my teenage years that exempted me from any filial obligation. She sent copies to both my parents and their lawyer, and we waited for a response. It came not through legal channels, but through Ethan, who called late one evening sounding more frustrated than I'd ever heard him. "Did you know about the legal letter?" he demanded without preamble. "Of course I knew," I replied, settling onto the couch. "It was addressed to me." "They didn't tell me they were doing that," he said, betrayal evident in his voice. "I found out when their lawyer called, asking if I'd be willing to testify about family dynamics if the case went to court." "What did you say?" He was quiet for a moment. "I told him I wouldn't lie under oath, that if asked, I would have to confirm you were kicked out at 16 and received no further support from them." The significance of this statement hit me hard. For the first time, Ethan was publicly choosing truth over family loyalty, placing justice above our parents' demands. It couldn't have been an easy decision. "Thank you," I said simply. "I know that must have been difficult." "It shouldn't have been," he replied, his voice bitter. "But they've always had this hold over me, this ability to make me feel guilty for not meeting their expectations. I'm trying to break free of it, but it's hard." "I know," I said softly, remembering my own journey to freedom. "It takes time." Our conversation shifted to other topics: his son's first steps, my latest design project, a potential visit during the upcoming holidays. Neither of us mentioned our parents again, but something had changed between us. A new solidarity had formed, a recognition that we were both working to heal from the same wounds. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from my parents' lawyer, this one markedly different in tone. They were withdrawing their legal claim, though they maintained I had a moral obligation to assist them. I filed it away with a sense of vindication that quickly faded to emptiness. There was no satisfaction in winning a battle that should never have been fought. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Jamie and I discussed starting a family, exploring adoption or surrogacy options. I was promoted at work, taking on more creative control over major projects. We bought our first house, a small but charming craftsman with a studio space for my personal art. For months, the only contact I had with my parents was through occasional updates from Ethan. Then, on a crisp autumn morning almost a year after our wedding, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Morgan Reynolds?" a woman's voice asked. "Morgan Wilson Reynolds, yes," I corrected automatically. "This is Nurse Patel from Pinecrest Nursing Home. I'm calling about your father, Richard Reynolds. He's had a stroke, and your contact information was in his file." The world seemed to still around me. Despite everything, despite the years of absence and the recent legal threats, the news hit me with unexpected force. "How serious is it?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Quite serious," the nurse replied gently. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but it would be best if family could come in." Family. The word still had the power to wound and heal simultaneously. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I heard myself say before hanging up. Jamie found me, sitting motionless on the edge of our bed, staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" "My father had a stroke," I said, the reality of it settling in as I spoke the words aloud. "They're saying it's serious, that family should come." Without hesitation, Jamie sat beside me, taking my hand. "Do you want me to come with you?" The simple question, asked without judgment or expectation, brought tears to my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Please." The 3-hour drive to Cedar Ridge passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger that even now, my father could disrupt my carefully constructed peace. Guilt that I felt anger at all in the face of his suffering. Fear of what awaited me at the nursing home. Not just my father's medical condition, but the inevitable confrontation with my mother and the weight of our shared history. Pinecrest Nursing Home was exactly what I had imagined from Ethan's description. Institutional, understaffed, with an underlying smell of antiseptic, barely masking less pleasant odors. Not the luxury facility my parents had originally wanted, but far from the worst option available. At the reception desk, I hesitated before giving my name. "I'm Morgan Wilson Reynolds. I'm here to see Richard Reynolds." The receptionist checked her computer. "Yes, the nurse called you. He's in room 237. His wife is with him now." Jamie squeezed my hand supportively as we navigated the beige hallways, following signs to the right wing. Outside room 237, I paused, suddenly unable to move forward. "I can't do this," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "I can't face them." "You can," Jamie said firmly, "but you don't have to if you truly don't want to. We can turn around right now, go back home, and no one would blame you." I closed my eyes, centering myself in the moment. No. I need to do this. Not for them, but for me. I need to know I'm strong enough to face them without losing myself. When I pushed open the door, the scene that greeted me was almost surreal in its mundanity. My father lay in a standard hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. My mother sat beside him, her once perfect hair now completely gray, her shoulders hunched with age and worry. They looked small, diminished, nothing, like the towering figures of my childhood memories. My mother looked up at the sound of the door, her eyes widening in shock. "Morgan?" "Hello, Mom," I said quietly. "The nurse called me." She stood shakily, her hand gripping her walker. For a moment, I thought she might try to embrace me, but she stopped, uncertainty written across her face. "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I admitted, moving further into the room with Jamie close behind. "How is he?" Her face crumpled slightly. "Not good, the doctors say. They say even if he recovers, he might not be the same. Memory problems, mobility issues, speech difficulties." I approached the bed cautiously, looking down at the man who had once wielded so much power over my life. His face was slack on one side, his breathing labored but steady. It was hard to reconcile this vulnerable figure with the father who had thrown me out with such cold finality. "Has Ethan been notified?" I asked, unable to think of anything else to say. My mother nodded. "He's driving in tonight. He has the children with him. Laura's at a conference." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, my mother seemed to notice Jamie, still standing, supportively at my side. "You must be." She trailed off, clearly having forgotten or never known my spouse's name. "Jamie Wilson Reynolds," they supplied smoothly, extending a hand. "Morgan's spouse." My mother shook their hand automatically, murmuring pleasantries that sounded hollow in the sterile room. Then she turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "The doctors want to know if we want extraordinary measures taken if things get worse." The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. She was asking for my input on a life-or-death decision for the father who had cut me out of his life. The absurdity of it might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so tragic. "I think that should be your decision," I said carefully. "You're his wife." "But you're his daughter," she countered, a note of desperation in her voice. "And I don't want to make this choice alone." In that moment, I saw my mother clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the cold, complicit figure of my teenage trauma, but as a frightened elderly woman facing the potential loss of her life partner, regardless of how flawed their relationship might have been. "What does Ethan think?" I asked, searching for a middle ground. "He says whatever I decide, he'll support me." Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "But I don't know what to do, Morgan. Your father wouldn't want to live. Diminished, but I don't know if I can just let him go." I took a deep breath, feeling Jamie's steady presence behind me like an anchor. "Then don't make that decision yet. Wait and see how he responds to treatment. Give him a chance to fight if that's what he wants." She nodded, relief washing over her face. Yes, that makes sense." We stayed for another hour, the conversation remaining surface level and careful. My mother asked about my job, about our house, carefully avoiding any mention of our estrangement or the recent legal threats. I answered politely but briefly, maintaining the emotional distance that felt necessary for my own protection. When we finally left, promising to return the next day, Jamie and I checked into a nearby hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed, emotionally, drained yet somehow lighter than I had expected to feel. "You did well in there," Jamie said, sitting beside me. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. Strangely, okay. Seeing them like that, old, vulnerable, afraid, it didn't fix anything, but it contextualized things. I guess they're just people. Flawed, limited people who made terrible choices. Does that make it easier or harder to forgive them? Both, I admitted. Easier because I can see they're not these all-powerful forces that can hurt me anymore. Harder because there's no grand villain to defeat. Just sad, aging people who never learned how to love without conditions. The next morning, we arrived at the nursing home to find Ethan already there. Dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd driven through the night. His two children, 4-year-old Noah and 2-year-old Emma, were coloring quietly in a corner, seemingly unfazed by the medical setting. "Morgan," he said, embracing me tightly, Thank you for coming." "How is he?" I asked, nodding toward our father, who looked unchanged from the previous day. "The same. The doctors did another scan this morning. The damage is significant." His voice caught slightly. "They're not optimistic about recovery." Our mother was asleep in the visitor's chair, her head at an uncomfortable angle. She looked exhausted, the lines in her face deeper than I remembered from just the day before. "Has she been here all night?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "She refused to leave. I tried to convince her to go home and rest, but..." He shrugged helplessly. I moved to the other side of the bed, looking down at our father. In sleep or unconsciousness, his face was relaxed, the perpetual disapproval I remembered nowhere to be seen. Without thinking, I reached out and straightened his blanket, a simple human gesture toward someone in need. "Dad?" Noah's small voice came from beside me. I hadn't noticed him approach. "Is that my grandpa?" I glanced at Ethan, unsure how to answer. These children knew our parents in a way I never would, as grandparents who presumably showed them more love and acceptance than they had shown their own children. "Yes," I said finally. "That's your grandpa." Noah studied the still figure with the solemn curiosity of young children. "Is he sleeping?" "Sort of," I replied, kneeling to his level. "He's sick, so his body is resting to try to get better." The child nodded, accepting this explanation without question. Then he looked at me with newfound interest. "Who are you?" Despite everything, I smiled. "I'm your Aunt Morgan. Your dad is my brother." His eyes widened. "I have an aunt?" "Dad? Didn't say I have an aunt." Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, buddy. Aunt Morgan lives far away, so you haven't met her before." Noah considered this information carefully before declaring, "Well, you're here now." As if that simple fact resolved the entire complicated history. And perhaps, in a child's uncomplicated world, it did. I was here now. Whatever had happened before, whatever would happen next, in this moment I had chosen to be present. Over the next 3 days, a strange sort of temporary truce emerged. My mother, Ethan, and I established a rotation so that someone was always with our father. Jamie took Ethan's children to the local park and library during the day, giving them a break from the oppressive atmosphere of the nursing home. On the 4th day, as I sat alone with my father during my designated time, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, clearly disoriented. Then his gaze shifted, landing on me with a confusion that quickly gave way to recognition. "Morgan?" His voice was slurred but understandable. "Yes," I said, leaning forward so he could see me better. "It's me." He swallowed with difficulty. "Why? Here." Such a simple question with such a complicated answer. Why was I here, sitting beside the bedside of a man who had thrown me away, who had tried to legally force me to support him, who had never once in 15 years reached out to apologize or make amends? "Because you're sick," I said finally, offering the simplest truth. The nurse called me. He seemed to process this information slowly. "Your mother?" "She's resting at home. She'll be back soon. Ethan's here too, with his kids." He nodded slightly, then winced as if the small movement caused pain. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. Finally, he spoke again, his words careful and deliberate despite the slurring. "Should have. Been there. When you needed me." The admission, not quite an apology but the closest he had ever come, caught me completely off guard. I had imagined this moment countless times over the years, fantasized about what I would say if my father ever acknowledged his failure. In my imagination, I had been righteously angry, coldly dismissive, or grandly forgiving. In reality, I felt none of those things. Just a quiet sadness for all the years lost, All the love withheld, all the damage done that could never fully heal. Yes, I said simply, you should have. His eyes, clouded with medication and illness, filled with tears. Too late now. For some things, yes, I agreed, unwilling to offer false comfort. But we're both still here. That counts for something. He closed his eyes, whether from exhaustion or emotion I couldn't tell. Proud, he murmured, the word barely audible. Of who you became. Then he drifted back to sleep or unconsciousness, leaving me sitting beside him with tears streaming down my face. Not for the father he had been, but for the father he might have been if he had been capable of seeing, beyond his own rigid expectations. When my mother returned an hour later, I told her about our brief conversation. She sat heavily in the chair opposite me, her expression a complex mixture of hope and regret. He talked about you sometimes, she said hesitantly. Over the years. Wondered how you were doing. But never enough to reach out, I observed without rancor. She nodded, acknowledging the truth. Pride, stubbornness, fear of rejection. All the worst parts of him, of us, kept us from trying to find you. And then when we finally did contact you, it was for money, not reconciliation, I finished for her. She had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, by then we were desperate. But that's no excuse. We lapsed into silence, the monitors tracking my father's vital signs providing a rhythmic backdrop. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice small but determined. I don't expect your forgiveness, Morgan. What we did, what I did by not standing up for you, it's unforgivable. But I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted it. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only genuine remorse. It didn't erase the past, didn't heal the deep wounds of abandonment, but it was something. An acknowledgement of wrong done, a step toward whatever limited healing might still be possible. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. It matters, even now. My father never fully regained consciousness after our brief exchange. 3 days later, with Ethan, my mother, and me gathered around his bed, he took his last labored breath and was gone. The end, when it came, was anticlimactic. No dramatic deathbed reconciliation, no profound final words, just the quiet cessation of a life that had touched mine so profoundly, for better and worse. The funeral was small and subdued. My father had outlived many of his friends, and his declining health in recent years had further shrunk his social circle. I stood beside my mother and Ethan as the minister spoke of a man I barely recognized. From the description, loving husband, devoted father, dedicated community member. The partial truth of these words reminded me that no one is entirely good or bad, that my father had been capable of love, even if he had withheld it from me when I needed it most. After the service, as attendees gathered at my parents' house, for the traditional post-funeral meal, I found myself in my old bedroom, now converted to a generic guest room with no trace of my teenage existence. Jamie found me there, standing by the window that overlooked the backyard where I had once played. "You okay?" they asked, wrapping their arms around me from behind. "I think so," I replied honestly. "It's strange. I mourned my father years ago when he chose to cut me out of his life. His actual death feels separate from that earlier grief." Jamie nodded against my shoulder. "What happens now? With your mom, I mean?" It was the question I had been avoiding since my father's death. My mother was now alone, her health declining, her financial situation precarious. The family home would need to be sold to pay outstanding medical bills, and she had nowhere to go. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't just abandon her, but I also can't pretend the past didn't happen. We can't just become a happy family after everything." "No," Jamie agreed. but maybe there's a middle path, something between cutting her off completely and taking full responsibility for her. That night, after most of the funeral guests had left, I sat down with my mother and Ethan at the kitchen table where so many family meals had been shared, where my life had changed irrevocably. At 16, the familiar setting felt surreal, like stepping into a faded photograph. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said directly. "The house will have to be sold to cover Dad's medical bills. Where will you live?" My mother looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I have a small pension, but it's not enough for rent anywhere decent. Ethan has already done so much, taking care of the funeral arrangements, helping with the medical decisions." "Laura and I have discussed it," Ethan said cautiously. "We could convert our basement into an apartment, but with 2 small children and Laura's mother already living with us." The unspoken question hung in the air. Would I be willing to help? Not out of obligation or guilt, but out of basic human compassion for an elderly woman who had nowhere else to turn. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before me. This was the test, not whether I could hold on to anger, but whether I could move beyond it without sacrificing my own boundaries and well-being. "I won't have you move in with us," I said clearly, watching my mother's expression fall slightly. "That wouldn't be healthy for either of us, but—" I glanced at Jamie, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been looking at houses with in-law suites or detached guest cottages. If we found something suitable, I would be willing to provide housing, not financial support beyond that, but a safe place to live." My mother's eyes widened in surprise. "You would do that? After everything?" "With conditions," I specified. "You would need to respect our boundaries. No unannounced visits to the main house, no guilt trips, no criticism of our life choices, and you would need to continue the therapy you started after Dad's stroke, working on yourself, taking responsibility for your actions." She nodded rapidly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, yes, of course. I wouldn't expect anything else. And this isn't forgiveness," I added, needing to be completely clear. "This is me choosing to be the kind of person who doesn't turn away someone in genuine need even if that person has hurt me. It's about who I want to be, not what you deserve." "I understand," she whispered. "And I'm grateful, more than I can say." As we finished discussing the practical details, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This decision wouldn't erase the past or heal all wounds. It wouldn't give me back the parents I should have had or the childhood support I deserved. But it would allow me to move forward without the weight of unresolved anger, to live according to my own values rather than in reaction to their failures. The true test had never been whether I would financially support my parents in their old age. It had been whether I could face them, set clear boundaries, and still act with compassion, not for their sake, but for my own integrity. Whether I could break the cycle of conditional love they had established without losing my capacity for compassion in the process. As Jamie and I drove back to our hotel that night, the weight of the day's emotions finally caught up with me. "Did I make the right decision?" I asked, staring out at the familiar streets of Cedar Ridge passing by my window. Jamie reached across the console to take my hand. "There is no objectively right decision here, Morgan. There's only the choice that lets you live with yourself, that aligns with who you are and who you want to be. And if I regret it, then we adjust," they said simply. "Nothing is set in stone. You're offering help on your terms, with clear boundaries. If those boundaries are violated, if the arrangement becomes harmful to you, we change course." Their words reassured me, reminding me that this wasn't the end of the story but another turning point, one where I was firmly in control of my own narrative. No matter what happened next, I had faced the hardest test of all, confronting my past without being consumed by it, offering compassion without sacrificing my self-respect. As we pulled into the hotel parking lot, I looked up at the night sky, at the same stars I had wished on as a child, dreaming of escape and acceptance. I had found both, not through others' validation, but through my own courage and resilience. The road ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding any kind of relationship with my mother would require work on both sides, and the wounds of the past would never completely disappear. But for the first time, I felt truly free of their power to define me. I had been tested by the hardest choice of all, whether to help those who had hurt me, and I had found an answer that honored both my history and my humanity. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years, anchored by the knowledge that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, guided by my own moral compass rather than the shifting expectations of others. The test had come, and, while there was no perfect solution, I had found my way through it with my integrity intact and my heart still capable of compassion, perhaps the greatest victory of all. 6 months after my father's funeral, Jamie and I closed on a craftsman-style house in a quiet Riverside neighborhood. The property featured a detached guest cottage at the back of the large lot, small but comfortable, with a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and living area. It was close enough for convenience, but separate enough to maintain boundaries, exactly what we had been looking for. My mother moved in a week later, arriving with 2 suitcases and a few boxes of personal belongings. The rest of her possessions had been sold along with the family home, the proceeds barely covering my father's outstanding medical bills and funeral expenses. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished not just by age and grief, but by the humbling circumstances of her new reality. "It's lovely," she said, looking around the cottage with genuine appreciation. "You've made it so nice." Jamie had indeed spent considerable time furnishing the space, making it comfortable without being luxurious. Fresh paint in warm neutrals, simple but good quality furniture, a small patio with potted plants, all designed to feel like a home, not a charity case. "The garden gets morning sun," I explained, showing her the small raised beds Jamie had installed. "If you want to grow herbs or flowers." She nodded, trailing her fingers over a countertop. "Your father never let me garden at the house. Said it was a waste of time and money." The casual revelation of this small control surprised me. My father had always been domineering, but I had never considered how his rigid nature might have limited my mother's life in countless small ways. It didn't excuse her complicity in how I had been treated, but it added another layer to my understanding of their complicated dynamic. "Well, you can garden all you want here," I said. "Jamie can help you get started if you'd like." The early weeks of our new arrangement were awkward but cordial. My mother kept to herself mostly, respecting the boundaries we had established. I checked on her daily but briefly, making sure she had everything she needed without lingering long enough. For emotional entanglements, Jamie, ever the diplomatic one, often brought her meals or invited her for coffee on the main house's back porch, easing the tension between us with their natural warmth and lack of shared history. At Dr. Montero's suggestion, I had continued my therapy sessions, working through the complex emotions of having my mother back in my life after so many years of estrangement. My mother, true to her word, was seeing her own therapist, though we never discussed the content of those sessions. "How are you feeling about the arrangement so far?" Dr. Montero asked during one of our sessions, about a month after my mother had moved in. I considered the question carefully. "Surprisingly okay. She's been respectful of our space, hasn't made demands or tried to insert herself where she's not wanted. It's almost like living near a polite acquaintance rather than a mother." "And how do you feel about that distance?" "Safe," I admitted, "but also a little sad sometimes. Not because I want a closer relationship necessarily, but because I'm confronted daily with what could have been, what should have been, if she had been this respectful of boundaries when I was growing up." Dr. Montero nodded thoughtfully. "That grief for what should have been is completely valid. You're mourning not just the mother you had, but the mother you deserved and never got. The insight resonated deeply. I was grieving, not for my father's death or even for the loss of my childhood family, but for the family I should have had. Parents who protected rather than rejected, who loved unconditionally rather than with caveats and exceptions. Do you think people can really change? I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since agreeing to this arrangement. Or am I just setting myself up for disappointment? People can change, Dr. Montero replied carefully, but usually in small incremental ways rather than total transformations. Your mother may never become the parent you deserved, but she might become someone you can have a limited, respectful relationship with. The question is whether that's enough for you. I pondered this on the drive home, watching the familiar Riverside streets pass by my window. Was a limited, polite relationship with my mother enough? Did I even want more than that, given our history? I wasn't sure, but for now the arrangement was working, and that was all I could ask for. When I arrived home, I found Jamie and my mother sitting on the back porch, photo albums spread across the table between them. My stomach tightened instinctively. Those albums contained my childhood, moments captured before everything fell apart. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. "Morgan," Jamie called, spotting me crossing the yard. "Your mom found these in one of her boxes. I hope you don't mind us looking." I approached cautiously, noting my mother's uncertain expression. "I should have asked first," she said. "I just thought." Jamie seemed interested in seeing what you were like as a child. "It's fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was. I sat down, glancing at the open album. There I was, perhaps 7 or 8, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a drawing I had made. I barely recognized that carefree child. "You were so artistic even then," my mother said softly. "Always drawing, always creating something." The observation, simple, accurate, appreciative of who I had actually been rather than who they had wanted me to be, caught me off guard. "Dad hated that," I found myself saying. He was always telling me to put away the arts and crafts and focus on real subjects. My mother nodded, her expression sad. "He didn't understand creativity. His father was the same way, practical to a fault, suspicious of anything that couldn't be measured or quantified." "That doesn't excuse how he treated me," I said, an edge creeping into my voice despite my effort to remain neutral. "No," she agreed immediately. "Nothing excuses that. I'm not defending him, just trying to understand him, I suppose. Trying to understand myself and why I let it happen." Jamie, sensing the tension, stood up. "I should start dinner. Take your time with the albums." As they disappeared into the house, my mother and I sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of the past pressing down between us. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The day you left, or rather, the day we made you leave." I stiffened, not sure I was ready for this conversation. It was a long time ago. "Not to me," she said, meeting my eyes directly. "In my mind, it was yesterday. I can still see your face when your father gave you that ultimatum. You looked so betrayed. And you looked at me, waiting for me to say something, to stand up for you. And I didn't." The memory was painfully vivid, standing in the dining room, my father's cold voice laying out my options, my desperate glance toward my mother, who had looked down at her plate, saying nothing. "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop. It, raw and painful even after all these years. "Why didn't you say anything?" She took a shaky breath. "Because I was a coward. Because I'd spent 20 years letting your father make all the important decisions. Because I was more afraid of his disapproval than I was of losing my daughter." Her voice broke on the last word. "It's the greatest regret of my life, Morgan. Not that it changes anything or makes it better." I sat very still, absorbing her words. It wasn't a full explanation. Nothing could fully explain a mother choosing not to protect her child, but it was more honest than anything she had offered before. "I saw myself in you, she continued after a moment. Your independence, your creativity, your stubbornness, all the things your father tried to stamp out of me over the years. And instead of protecting those qualities in you, I let him try to eliminate them from you too." The admission hung in the air between us, neither accusation nor excuse, just a painful truth finally spoken aloud. I didn't know how to respond, what to do with this belated insight that couldn't change the past but might, possibly, inform the future. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," my mother added, closing the photo album with careful hands. "I just wanted you to know that I see it. Now, what I did, what I failed to do. And I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth after all this time." "I don't know what it's worth," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I hear you. And that's something." She nodded, accepting this limited response with a dignity I hadn't expected. "That's more than I deserve." We sat in silence for a while longer, the evening light fading around us. Finally, I stood up. "I should help Jamie with dinner." "Of course," she said, gathering the albums. "Thank you for looking at these with me." As I turned to go, she spoke again, her voice tentative. "Morgan, would it be all right if I came to your art show next month? Jamie mentioned it, but I understand if you'd rather I didn't." The question stopped me in my tracks. My first gallery showing, a small local affair, but a significant milestone in my journey as an artist, was something I had been both excited and nervous about. The thought of my mother there, witnessing this achievement after years of dismissing my artistic pursuits, was complicated. "I'll think about it," I said finally, neither yes nor no, but an acknowledgement of her request. That night, as Jamie and I lay in bed, I recounted the conversation. "She apologized," I said, still processing the exchange. Not a qualified apology or an excuse, but an actual acknowledgement of what she did wrong. Jamie turned to face me, in the darkness. "Does it change anything for you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give me back those years or heal all the damage. But it's something. An opening, maybe." "And the art show? Will you let her come?" I sighed, conflicted. Part of me wants to say no, to protect this achievement from someone who never valued my art. But another part thinks maybe it would be. I don't know, healing somehow? To have her see this part of me that they tried so hard to suppress? "There's no right answer," Jamie said gently. "Only what feels right to you." In the end, I decided to allow my mother to attend the gallery opening. It was a decision made not out of obligation or a desire for her approval, but from a place of strength, a recognition that her presence could no longer diminish my accomplishments or my sense of self-worth. The night of the show arrived, the small gallery filled with colleagues, friends, and local art enthusiasts. My work, a series of mixed media pieces exploring themes of home, belonging, and resilience, hung on the white walls, pieces of my soul exposed for public viewing. Jamie stayed close by my side, a steady presence as I navigated conversations with potential buyers and art critics. I spotted my mother the moment she entered, looking uncertain in a simple dress that had seen better days, clutching her purse, like a lifeline. For a moment, she stood just inside the door, scanning the crowd until she found me. Our eyes met across the room, and she offered a hesitant smile but made no move to approach, respecting my space even here. As the evening progressed, I noticed her moving slowly from piece to piece, spending long minutes in front of each one, studying them with an intensity that surprised me. When the gallery owner pulled me aside to introduce me to a collector interested in my work, I lost track of her for a while. Later, as the crowd thinned, I found her standing in front of my centerpiece, a large canvas titled Reclamation that incorporated fragments of discarded materials transformed into something new and unexpectedly beautiful. "What do you think?" I asked, coming to stand beside her. She seemed startled by my approach. "It's extraordinary," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They all are. You're so talented, Morgan. You always were, even when we couldn't see it." The simple validation, decades too late but sincerely offered, affected me more than I had expected. Not because I needed her approval anymore, that desperation had long since faded, but because it represented a shift in how she saw me, an acceptance of who I actually was, rather than who she had wanted me to be. "Thank you for inviting me," she continued. "I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." "It wasn't," I acknowledged, "but I'm glad you came." As Jamie joined us, slipping an arm around my waist, my mother smiled at us both. "I should go," she said. "Let you enjoy your success with your friends. But Morgan, I'm so proud of you. Not just for this," she gestured at the artwork surrounding us, "but for the person you've become despite everything." After she left, Jamie squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, surprised to find it was true. "I am. It was. Good, actually. Not perfect, not miraculous, but good." That night marked a subtle but significant shift in my relationship with my mother. We didn't suddenly become close. Too much had happened for that kind of fairy tale ending. But a certain ease began to develop between us. Small conversations over coffee occasionally became longer discussions. Sunday dinners in the main house became a regular occurrence, my mother contributing dishes she had never been allowed to make when my father dictated the menu. 6 months later, as spring bloomed across Riverside, she suffered a minor stroke. The doctors assured us it wasn't life-threatening, but it left her with a slight weakness on her right side and occasional difficulty finding words. When she was released from the hospital, the guest cottage suddenly seemed too isolated, too far from help if she needed it. "We could look into assisted living," I suggested during a family meeting with Jamie Ethan, visiting from out of town, and my mother. "No," she said firmly, one of the few times she had directly contradicted me since moving into the cottage. "I don't want to be in one of those places, not yet. I'm not that helpless." "Mom, it's not about being helpless," Ethan explained gently. "It's about having support nearby." "I have support nearby," she insisted, looking at me. "Unless you buy." "Want me to leave? I would understand if you did." The vulnerability in her statement caught me off guard. For all our careful progress, she still fundamentally believed I might withdraw my support at any moment, just as she and my father had withdrawn theirs when I became inconvenient. "I don't want you to leave," I said, the truth of it surprising even me. "But the cottage isn't safe for you alone anymore. You need someone closer, someone who can check on you during the night or help if you fall." "What about the third bedroom?" Jamie suggested, turning to me. "We've just been using it for storage. It could be converted into a suite for your mom, private bathroom, small sitting area. She'd have her own space but be under the same roof if she needed help." I hesitated, the prospect of having my mother actually living in our home, not just nearby, more complicated than I had anticipated. It was one thing to maintain a cordial relationship with her at a slight distance, another to share daily life under one roof. "You don't have to decide now," my mother said quickly, reading my expression. "I can manage in the cottage a while longer while you think about it." Later that night, after Ethan had returned to his hotel and my mother to the cottage, Jamie and I sat on our back porch, the same spot where I had first begun to reconnect with my mother over those old photo albums. "Talk to me," Jamie said, always sensitive to my moods. "What are you thinking about the bedroom idea?" I sighed, trying to sort through my tangled emotions. Part of me thinks it makes practical sense. She needs more support than the cottage provides, and assisted living is expensive. Another part is terrified of having her so close, of losing the safe distance we've maintained. Which part is louder? They asked. I don't know, I admitted. A year ago, the answer would have been obvious. Keep her at arm's length, protect myself at all costs. But now, I've seen her trying so hard to respect boundaries, to understand who I actually am rather than who she wanted me to be. I've seen genuine change, even if it's coming decades too late. Jamie nodded thoughtfully. And what about you? Have you changed too? The question gave me pause. Had I changed? Certainly my circumstances had, from abandoned teenager to successful adult, from rejected daughter to cautious caregiver. But the deeper transformation was more subtle, harder to quantify. I think I have, I said slowly. I'm not defined by their rejection anymore. I don't measure my worth by their approval or lack thereof. I can see them clearly now, not as the all-powerful figures of my childhood or the villains of my young adulthood, but as deeply flawed people who made terrible choices that hurt me immeasurably. And knowing that, seeing them clearly, you can choose how much of a relationship you want with your mother, Jamie observed, from a position of strength, not fear or obligation. The insight resonated deeply. This was the true transformation, not a miraculous healing of old wounds or a perfect reconciliation, but the ability to make choices about this relationship from a place of agency rather than reaction. The power dynamic had shifted, not because I sought control or revenge, but because I had found a centered sense of self that no longer depended on parental validation. I think, I said carefully, that I want to offer her the bedroom, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it's the kind choice, the human choice, and I want to be the kind of person who can make that choice without losing myself in the process. The renovation of the third bedroom took several weeks. Jamie and I designed the space to give my mother as much independence as possible while ensuring she had the support her health now required. A hospital-grade bed that could be adjusted for comfort, grab bars in the bathroom, a small refrigerator and microwave so she could prepare simple meals when she didn't feel like joining us. A separate entrance from the side yard gave her the option of coming and going without always passing through the main house. The day she moved in was quiet, without ceremony. Ethan had returned to help, bringing his children who were thrilled to have their grandmother in the same house where they stayed during visits. As we unpacked her limited belongings, I found myself arranging her things with unexpected care, wanting the space to feel like hers, like home. Thank you, she said as we finished, standing in the center of the room that would now be hers. I know this isn't what either of us imagined for our lives. No, I agreed. But we're here now, making the best of it. She nodded. Her eyes filling with tears, she quickly blinked away. You're a better daughter than I deserved, Morgan. A better person than I taught you to be. I didn't learn it from you, I said honestly. I learned it from Aunt Olivia, from Zoe, from Jamie, from every person who showed me what unconditional love and support actually look like. Instead of being hurt by this truth, she nodded in acceptance. I'm grateful to them then, and I hope it's not too late for me to learn those lessons too. Life settled into a new rhythm over the following months. My mother's presence in our home was an adjustment, both for her, used to my father's rigid household rules, and for us, accustomed to our private space. There were awkward moments, minor tensions, occasional misunderstandings. But there were also unexpected moments of connection. My mother teaching Jamie an old family recipe, sharing stories of my grandmother that I had never heard, watching with genuine interest as I worked on new art pieces in my home studio. My relationship with her would never be the uncomplicated mother-daughter bond I had yearned for as a child. Too much had happened, too many formative years lost, too many wounds inflicted. But what emerged instead was something I had never anticipated: a relationship between two adults, built on cautious respect rather than obligation, developing not because of shared DNA, but because of conscious, daily choices to try to understand each other. On the anniversary of my father's death, I found my mother sitting in the garden Jamie had helped her plant, looking at old photographs. I hesitated, unsure whether to join her or leave her to her memories. "Morgan," she called, spotting me. "Would you sit with me for a bit?" I settled beside her on the garden bench, noticing the photos were of my father in his younger days, before I knew him, when he still smiled easily and hadn't hardened into the rigid, controlling man who had shaped my childhood. "Do you miss him?" I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question carefully. "I miss who he was when we first met. Before life's disappointments made him bitter. Before he became so afraid of losing control that he controlled everything and everyone around him." She sighed, setting the photos aside. "But the man he became? The man who threw his own daughter out? No, I don't miss that person." Her honesty was refreshing. No platitudes, no romanticizing the past, just a clear-eyed assessment of a complicated relationship. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago," she continued, "about how you learned what love is from people other than us. You were right, of course. Your father and I. We didn't know how to love unconditionally. We only knew how to love when our expectations were met, when you conformed to what we thought you should be." I nodded, the old pain still there but dulled by time and understanding. "That's not really love at all." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not. It's control disguised as care, ownership masked as parental concern. I see that now, too late to undo the damage, but not too late to acknowledge it." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching butterflies flit between the flowers she had planted. Finally, she spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know what the strangest part is? I think you're happier than I ever was. Despite everything, or maybe because of it, you've built a life filled with genuine love and purpose. You know who you are, what matters to you. I never had that clarity." The observation struck me as profoundly true. For all the hardship, for all the years of struggle and abandonment, I had emerged with something my parents never managed to find: an authentic sense of self, untethered from others' expectations, capable of both setting boundaries and offering compassion. "It's not too late for you either," I said, surprising myself with the sentiment. "You're still here. You can still choose who you want to be going forward." She smiled, a genuine expression that softened the lines of her face. "I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to be better than I was, to learn what real love looks like by watching you and Jamie, to understand what I missed by clinging to your father's rigid view of the world." This, perhaps, was the most unexpected transformation of all. Not just my evolution from wounded child to empowered adult, but my mother's late-in-life journey from complicit enabler to someone capable of self-reflection and genuine remorse. As summer turned to fall, Jamie and I began discussing a topic we had been circling for months: starting a family of our own. The prospect of becoming a parent myself brought a new dimension to my healing journey, forcing me to confront lingering fears and insecurities. "What if I repeat their mistakes?" I asked Dr. Montero during a therapy session. "What if there's something fundamentally broken in how I understand parenting because of how I was raised?" "That's a common fear for adults who experienced childhood trauma," she assured me. "But awareness is the first step toward prevention. You're conscious of what went wrong in your own upbringing in a way your parents never were." "My mother is aware now," I pointed out. "Too late to change how she parented me, but she sees it clearly now." Dr. Montero nodded. "That's actually a resource for you. Having her acknowledge the mistakes rather than defend or deny them means you can learn from that awareness without having to fight through layers of family mythology. The observation shifted something in my thinking. My mother's presence in our home, her late-in-life reckoning with past mistakes, could actually be an asset as Jamie and I considered parenthood. Not because she would be a model of what to do, but because she had become a clear-eyed witness to what not to do. When we finally decided to begin the adoption process, I approached my mother with both apprehension and hope. We were sitting in her small suite, having tea as had become our Sunday afternoon routine. "Jamie and I have been talking," I began cautiously. "We're starting the process to adopt a child." Her teacup froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widening. "A baby?" "Most likely an older child, actually," I explained. "There are so many kids in the system who need homes, especially teenagers." The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. Me, once a rejected teenager, now preparing to offer a home to someone in a similar situation. My mother set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "You'll be wonderful parents," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Both of you." "We hope so," I replied. "We're trying to go into it with realistic expectations, understanding that adoption comes with unique challenges." She nodded, then asked hesitantly, "And what role? I mean, would I be?" The unfinished question hung in the air between us. Would she be acknowledged as a grandmother? Would she have a relationship with this child we hope to bring into our family? "That depends," I said honestly, "on how things continue between us, on the needs of whatever child joins our family, on many factors we can't predict yet. But if you're asking if we intend to exclude you from their life categorically, the answer is no. We'll navigate that relationship thoughtfully, prioritizing what's best for the child." The relief on her face was palpable. "Thank you. That's more than I have any right to expect." "It's not about rights," I said, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "It's about the family we're all choosing to be now, not the family we failed to be then." As I drove home from work a few weeks later, I found myself reflecting on the long, winding path that had led to this moment. From the traumatized 16-year-old with trash bags of belongings, to the successful adult preparing to provide a home for a child in need. The journey had not been linear. It had been filled with setbacks and unexpected turns, moments of doubt and flashes of clarity. The transformation hadn't happened in a single dramatic moment. It had unfolded gradually through countless small choices. The decision to pursue education despite obstacles, to create art even when it wasn't valued, to open myself to love with Jamie despite the fear of rejection, to offer limited help to my parents on my own terms, to create a relationship with my mother based on present reality rather than past wounds. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw my mother in the garden, carefully tending the plants she had grown from seeds. Jamie was on the porch, working on their laptop, occasionally glancing up to wave or call something to her. This imperfect, unexpected family we had pieced together, not from obligation but from choice, not from shared history but from shared humanity. Inside, on my desk, lay the adoption application we had submitted the previous week. The first step in expanding our family, in creating the kind of home I had been denied, one where love wasn't conditional, where mistakes were met with understanding, rather than rejection, where boundaries were respected and individuality celebrated. I had been transformed not into someone untouched by trauma, those scars would always be part of me, but into someone who had integrated that trauma into a richer, more compassionate understanding of human frailty and resilience. I had become someone who could look at my parents and see not just the people who had failed me so profoundly, but fellow humans struggling with their own limitations and regrets. That evening, as Jamie and I discussed potential bedroom colors for our future child, my mother knocked gently on the open door. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, still careful about boundaries even after months in our home. "I found something. I thought you might want." She held out a small, worn wooden box that I recognized immediately. My childhood treasure box, where I had kept special drawings, notes from friends, small mementos of happiness. "I saved it," she explained, her voice soft. "When your father wanted to clear out your room, I hid it. I always hoped someday you might want it back." I took the box with trembling hands, opening the lid to find the contents exactly as I had left them 15 years earlier. Pencil sketches of dreams I'd had, a friendship bracelet from Zoe, a small blue stone I'd found by the river and thought was magical. "Thank you," I whispered, unexpectedly moved by this small act of rebellion, this tiny way she had preserved a piece of me when everything else had been erased. She nodded, turning to leave us to our planning. At the door, she paused. "You know, Morgan, I've been thinking about what you said, about family being who we choose to be now, not who we failed to be then." "Yes?" "I think that's the most important lesson in all of this. Family isn't just blood. It isn't automatic or guaranteed. It's built through thousands of small choices, daily acts of love and respect, and showing up for each other." She smiled, a hint of tears in her eyes. "I'm trying to make better choices now, even if I can't undo the ones I made before." As she closed the door softly behind her, Jamie moved to sit beside me on the couch, looking at the childhood treasures spread across my lap. "You okay?" they asked, always attuned to my emotional state. I nodded, carefully replacing a faded drawing in the box. "I am. Not because everything's fixed or forgotten, but because I've found a way forward that honors both where I came from and who I've chosen to become." That night, as I drifted toward sleep with Jamie's steady breathing beside me, I thought about the email that had started this journey of reconciliation and transformation. My parents' entitled demand for nursing home money, the catalyst that had forced me to confront the past I had tried so hard to outrun. What had begun as a story of abandonment and rejection had evolved into something more nuanced, a narrative not just of trauma, but of healing, not just of resentment, but of selective forgiveness offered from a position of strength rather than obligation. A story without a perfect ending, because real life doesn't provide those, but with an opening to a new chapter written on my own terms. The 16-year-old girl with trash bags of belongings could never have imagined this future, not just the external trappings of success, but the internal landscape of peace, the hard-won wisdom that family is defined not by DNA, but by consistent acts of love and respect. She couldn't have foreseen that the parents who threw her away would one day need her help, or that she would find a way to offer limited assistance without sacrificing her own well-being. Most of all, she couldn't have known that the true transformation wouldn't be in her circumstances but in her understanding of herself, of her parents, of what family could mean when built intentionally rather than accepted uncritically. That she would become someone capable of setting boundaries and offering compassion simultaneously, of acknowledging pain without being defined by it, of creating the kind of home she had been denied. As sleep finally claimed me, my last conscious thought was not of the past, the trauma, the rejection, the years of struggle, but of the future unfolding before us. A future shaped not by what had been done to me, but by what I had chosen to do with the life I had fought so hard to build. A future where the cycle of conditional love and rejection would end with me, where a child in need would find the stable, accepting home I had longed for. That was the most profound transformation of all, from a victim of my parents' failures to the architect of a new kind of family, one built on choice rather than obligation, on boundaries alongside compassion, on the radical idea that love should never have to be earned or deserved, only freely given and gratefully received. 2 years had passed since my mother moved into our home. Our lives had found a rhythm that worked, not perfect, but functional. The adoption process had been long and challenging, full of home studies, interviews, and bureaucratic hurdles that tested our patience. But finally, we received the call that changed everything. "We have a potential match," the social worker Ms. Hernandez told us during a video call. "A 15-year-old girl named Abby. She's been in the system since she was 12, has moved through 4 foster homes in the last 3 years." My heart raced as Ms. Hernandez shared more details. Abby was artistic. She loved photography and writing poetry. She struggled in traditional classroom settings but excelled when allowed to learn at her own pace. She was guarded, slow to trust, quick to expect rejection. "She reminds me of you," Jamie whispered after the call ended. The way Ms. Hernandez described her, creative, resilient, wary of adults. The parallel wasn't lost on me. At 15, I'd been a year away from my own world imploding. Now I had the chance to provide what I'd been denied: stability, acceptance, the space to be herself without fear of abandonment. When we told my mother about Abby, her reaction surprised me. "A teenager?" she asked, her forehead creasing with concern. "That will be challenging." "We know," I replied, defensive instincts flaring despite our improved relationship. She must have seen the shift in my expression because she reached out, her hand hovering uncertainly before touching my arm. "I just meant, adolescence is difficult even in the best circumstances. For a child who's experienced so much disruption." She paused, then added quietly, "I made so many mistakes with you at that age. I wouldn't want to see those repeated." The admission disarmed me. "What would you do differently?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than confrontational. She considered. "The question seriously. Listen more. Control less. Recognize that teenagers push boundaries not to defy you, but to discover who they are." She looked down at her hands. "And stand up for them, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." These insights, hard-won through years of regret and reflection, weren't what I'd expected. My mother wasn't offering criticism of our decision, but sharing the wisdom of her failures, trying to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. "Would you be willing to share that perspective with Jamie and me sometimes?" I asked. Not as a directive, but as, I don't know, a cautionary tale? The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Of course. Though I suspect you already know instinctively what not to do, given your experience." 2 weeks later, we met Abby at a neutral location, a community center with an art room where Ms. Hernandez thought she might feel more comfortable. She was tall for her age, with dark hair cut unevenly as if she'd done it herself, wearing layers of black clothing despite the warm weather. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, took our measure the moment we walked in. "Hi, Abby," I said, not moving, closer until invited. "I'm Morgan, and this is my spouse, Jamie." She nodded slightly, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "They told me you're artists or something." "I'm a graphic designer," I explained. "Jamie's an architect, but yes, we both love art." "Cool," she said, the studied indifference of a teenager who'd learned not to show enthusiasm too quickly, not to invest in relationships that might disappear. "We brought something," Jamie said, setting a package on the table between us. "No pressure to open it now, but it's there when you're ready." Curiosity battled caution on Abby's face. After a moment, she reached for the package, unwrapping it with deliberate slowness. Inside was a camera, not top of the line, but a good quality digital SLR with manual controls. "Ms. Hernandez mentioned you like photography," I explained. "We thought, regardless of what happens with the placement, you should have the tools to pursue that interest." Abby looked up, suspicion warring with tentative hope. "I get to keep this, even if I don't? Even if things don't work out with you guys?" "It's yours," Jamie confirmed. "No strings attached." That was the first crack in her armor, a small one, barely perceptible, but there. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, she had taken 27 photos of the art room, the center's garden, and even a few tentative shots of Jamie and me when she thought we weren't paying attention. As we were leaving, Ms. Hernandez pulled me aside. "That went better than I expected," she said quietly. "She usually doesn't engage this much in initial meetings." "We're not trying to rush her," I explained. "We understand trust takes time." The social worker nodded approvingly. That's exactly the approach she needs. The next 3 months involved increasingly longer visits, first at the community center, then at a park near our home, eventually progressing to afternoon visits at our house. Abby remained cautious, but small signs of connection emerged, asking Jamie about architectural principles when they were sketching together, showing me her photography progress, even reluctantly, agreeing to let my mother teach her how to make her grandmother's famous apple tarts. My mother, to my surprise, proved to be unexpectedly good with Abby. She maintained a respectful distance, never pushing for interaction, but remained consistently available. When Abby snapped at her one afternoon, a typical teenage outburst, born of insecurity, my mother responded with a calm I'd never witnessed during my own adolescence. "It's okay to be angry," she said simply. "Being angry doesn't make you unlovable." Later, I found my mother in the garden, her hands shaking slightly as she pruned the roses. "That was really good," I said, the compliment feeling strange on my tongue. "How you handled Abby's outburst." She didn't look up from the roses. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I should have said to you at that age." The weekend, Abby finally came for an overnight stay, a major milestone in the transition process. Nerves ran high throughout the household. Jamie and I had prepared her room with meticulous care, making it comfortable but leaving enough blank space for her to make it her own. My mother had baked 3 different kinds of cookies, then worried she was overstepping. "What if she hates it here?" I fretted as we waited for Ms. Hernandez to drop her off. "What if we're completely wrong about being able to do this?" Jamie squeezed my hand. "Then we'll figure it out together, just like we figured everything else out." Abby arrived with a single duffel bag and her camera, the one possession she never left behind. She stood in the entryway, taking in the house with the careful assessment I recognized from my own days of evaluating new environments for threats and exits. "Your room is upstairs," I said, "but there's no rush to go up. Want to see the backyard first? The light is really good this time of day for photos." The evening unfolded with moments of awkwardness, punctuated by flashes of genuine connection. Abby was quiet during dinner, but became animated when describing a photography project she wanted to attempt. She maintained physical distance from everyone but allowed Jamie to show her how to adjust her camera settings for low-light shooting. Before bed, I showed her all the essentials: where towels were kept, how the shower worked, that the kitchen was always open if she got hungry during the night. "You don't have locks on your food?" she observed, the casual comment revealing volumes about previous living situations. "No," I confirmed. "No locks on food, bedroom doors lock from the inside only for privacy, and you're welcome to personalize your space however you want." She nodded, absorbing this information with the seriousness of someone documenting important safety protocols. "Cool, thanks." In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Instantly alert, I slipped out of bed without waking Jamie and moved quietly down the hallway. From the top of the stairs, I could see light spilling from the kitchen. I found Abby sitting at the counter, eating cereal and flipping through one of my old sketchbooks that had been on the shelf. She froze when she saw me, spoon halfway to her mouth, eyes wide with something like fear. "I got hungry," she said, the words carrying a defensive edge, "and I couldn't sleep." "That's completely fine," I said, keeping my voice casual as I moved to the refrigerator. "I was just going to get some water. Mind if I join you?" The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She shrugged, the universal teenage signal for reluctant agreement. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from her, not too close. "Find anything interesting in the sketchbook?" I asked, nodding toward the open page. "These are really good," she said, her finger hovering over a series of gesture drawings I'd done in art school. "You made these?" "About a decade ago, yeah. I was still figuring out my style." She turned another page, studying the progression of drawings. "Did you always know you wanted to be an artist?" "Always," I confirmed, even when my parents thought it was impractical. She looked up at that. "But they let you do it anyway?" The question created an opening, not one I had planned, but one that felt right in the moment. Not exactly. My relationship with my parents was complicated, especially as a teenager. Abby's attention sharpened, sensing something relevant to her own experience. "How complicated?" "They kicked me out when I was 16, I said simply, without drama or self-pity. "I had to figure out a lot of things on my own." Her eyes widened. "For real? But your mom lives here." "She does now. That's a more recent development. We were estranged for 15 years. Abby absorbed this information, her expression thoughtful. "So what changed?" "Many things. Time. Perspective. Both of us growing and changing in different ways." I took a sip of water. "And ultimately, me deciding that I could have a limited relationship with her on my terms without compromising who I am. Is that weird? Having her here after all that?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But mostly it's just our new normal, imperfect but workable." She was quiet for a moment, tracing the outline of a drawing with her fingertip. "None of my foster families ever kept me for more than 8 months, she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "They always said it wasn't working out, that I was too difficult." The vulnerability of this admission, offered in the quiet, safety of midnight, touched something deep within me. "I don't think people are difficult," I said carefully. "I think circumstances are difficult. Trauma is difficult. Trust is difficult. People are just trying to navigate all that the best they can." She looked up, her eyes searching mine for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slightly. "Yeah, maybe." We sat in companionable silence after that, sharing the peaceful kitchen in the middle of the night. Two people who understood displacement, who recognized the fragility of belonging, who knew how hard-won trust could be. The next morning, as Ms. Hernandez prepared to take Abby back to her group home, the social worker pulled me aside. "Abby asked if she could extend her next visit to the full weekend," she said, barely containing her smile. "That's unprecedented. She's never requested more time with a potential placement family." Hope flickered in my chest, tentative but growing. We'd love that. 3 months later, Abby moved in permanently. The transition wasn't smooth. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when her trust in us wavered in the face of old fears. But there were also breakthroughs. The first time she called our house home without catching herself. The day she hung her photographs on her bedroom walls. The evening she voluntarily joined my mother in the kitchen to learn another family recipe. 6 months after Abby's arrival, as Jamie and I were preparing for her first parent-teacher conference, I found myself reflecting on the circular nature of healing. The 16-year-old girl with trash bags of belongings had become a woman who could offer stability to another displaced teenager. The wounds that had once defined me had transformed into a map for navigating Abby's healing journey. Not because our experiences were identical, but because I understood the landscape of abandonment and recovery. My mother, too, had found an unexpected path to redemption. Not through my forgiveness, which remained complicated and partial, but through her relationship with Abby. She became the grandmother she had never been allowed to be to my children, offering Abby the wisdom and patience she had failed to give me. One evening, as I helped Abby edit photos for her school project, she asked the question I had been expecting since she'd learned fragments of my history. "Are you going to make your parents pay for your nursing home when they're old?" she asked, eyes fixed on the computer screen to avoid looking at me directly. I considered the question carefully, recognizing its true nature, not just curiosity about my choices, but anxiety about her own future, her place in our family, the permanence of our commitment. "My father passed away," I explained. "And my mother lives with us now because that's what I chose, not out of obligation. But the important thing isn't what I did or didn't do for my parents. It's that those choices were mine to make, based on my own values and boundaries." She nodded, absorbing this. "So you're not, like, keeping score of what people owe each other?" "No," I said firmly. "Love isn't a transaction. It's not about debts or payments or what anyone deserves. It's about the family we choose to create every day through our actions." Abby was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping restlessly on the desk. "So, if I mess up, if I'm difficult sometimes, you guys won't just—" "We won't leave," I finished for her, meeting her eyes directly. "Your place here isn't conditional on perfect behavior or gratitude or anything else. You're family now, not because of forms we signed or shared DNA, but because we choose each other, imperfections and all." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a tentative acceptance of this concept that ran counter to everything her experience had taught her. "Okay," she said simply. "Cool." Later that night, after Abby had gone to bed and Jamie was working late in their home office, I found my mother in her room, looking through an old photo album I'd never seen before. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the small sofa. She nodded, making room for me. The album contained photos I didn't recognize. My grandparents as young parents, my mother as a child, family gatherings from before, my birth. "I've been thinking about patterns," she said, her finger tracing the outline of a family portrait. "How we inherit ways of loving, ways of hurting, ways of seeing the world. How hard it is to break those patterns without even realizing they exist." I studied a photo of my grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, standing stiffly beside my grandfather. Their expressions were formal, unsmiling, the same reserve I'd seen in countless photos of my own childhood. "You're breaking the pattern with Abby," my mother continued. "The way you listen to her, respect her boundaries, allow her to be herself. It's what I should have done with you." "I had good teachers," I said, thinking of Aunt Olivia, of Zoe, of all the people who had shown me what unconditional support looked like. "And clear examples of what not to do." She nodded, accepting this with the grace she had developed in recent years. "I'm grateful you're allowing me to be part of this family you've created, to see how it can be different." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no moment of complete forgiveness that erased the past. Just this quiet acknowledgement of growth, of lessons learned too late for one generation, but perhaps in time for the next. As spring turned to summer, our household settled into its own unique rhythm. Abby's photography began winning local contests. Jamie's architectural firm took on an exciting international project. My mother's health stabilized, allowing her more independence. And I found myself experiencing a peace I had never thought possible, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been integrated into a present built on choice rather than obligation, on boundaries alongside compassion. The path from abandoned teenager to the woman I had become wasn't linear or simple. It involved false starts and setbacks, moments of doubt and flashes of clarity. The 16-year-old with trash bags of belongings could never have imagined this future, not just the external markers of success, but the internal landscape of wholeness. The family created not from blood, but from deliberate daily choices, to love and be loved. My parents had kicked me out at 16. They had expected me to fund their retirement without reconciliation or remorse. But the final chapter of this story wasn't written by their actions or expectations. It was authored by my own choices, my own values, my own definition of what family truly means. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.